So you may have recently watched a video from my buddies Andrew and Brett where they took a look at Nvidia GeForce Now, saying why they think it's actually pretty awesome. And hey, I agree with them, it is a pretty awesome service. But they were not completely correct. And so today, I want to discuss exactly why Nvidia GeForce Now isn't as amazing as it may look. Let's begin. In an interesting twist of irony, Nvidia GeForce Now's biggest strength also just so happens to be its biggest weakness. The fact that it's a streaming service means it's entirely reliant on the internet. But not only does it need an internet connection, it needs an incredibly fast internet connection. And newsflash, not everybody has the best internet. GeForce Now requires at least 25 megabits per second in order for you to play. And Nvidia recommends that you actually have 50 or more in order for the optimal playing experience. Well, let me tell you a story that I recently had on my trip to Peru. I was down in Lima, which is the capital of Peru, and I was staying at an Airbnb. Very nice place, really enjoyed it. Except for the fact that my internet was from the Stone Ages. Seriously, I was getting 5 megabits per second on the download and 2 on the upload. To put that into perspective, my internet here in my apartment in Ecuador is 20 megabits per second on the download and the upload. And in the nighttime, my ISP actually opens up and allows for connections as high as 50, 60, or even more sometimes. So my internet here is pretty decent. Whereas in Peru, I was watching YouTube videos at 360p and I was getting buffering. This goes to show exactly how important it is to have a very fast internet connection. And with a streaming service like Nvidia GeForce, it requires an incredibly fast internet connection that never throttles down in order for you to have the proper gameplay experience. To put it into perspective, look at Netflix, yet another popular streaming service. Now Netflix, being video streaming, only requires 0.5. That's 0 followed by a 5. 0.5 megabits per second in order for you to just watch. If you want to watch in HD, all you're going to need is 5 megabits per second. And if you want to watch in 4K, you need at least 25 megabits, which is the bare minimum requirement for GeForce Now. So it goes to show you exactly how much more demanding a streaming service like GeForce Now is compared to Netflix, since with GeForce Now you're not just watching the media, you're also watching and sending inputs. And of course, in any type of game, you're going to want a one-to-one response. Otherwise, it's just going to be an incredibly frustrating experience when you're trying to put in an input only for it to happen 5 seconds later. And you definitely don't want choppy playback either. You can handle buffering with a video on Netflix, but buffering while you're trying to play a game, yeah, that's not going to be fun. And that's really what makes GeForce Now amazing, but there's the asterisk. It's amazing if you have a great internet connection. Now, I just gave the example of my experience in Peru, and you may be thinking, AK, that was Peru, that's in South America. Of course you're not gonna have amazing internet. Why didn't you pick a better country? Okay, fine, let's pick a much larger, much more developed nation. The great old US of A. A report done by the folks over at Recode back in June of 2017 took a look at the status of internet connections in many big nations worldwide, the US included. From the US, they found that 16 million people in rural areas and over 62 million people in urban areas do not have access to or simply cannot afford broadband internet access. That's about 78 million Americans. The US, as large and developed as a nation that it is, does not have the infrastructure to provide high-speed internet access to every one of its citizens. That goes to show you the disparity of worldwide internet access. Some countries have great internet, other countries it's kind of average, and in some countries it's very minuscule that people have high-speed internet connections. And again, a service like GeForce Now requires it. It's not just something that's nice to have. In this instance, it is actually a requirement. Now you might now argue, well AK, I already have all the requirements. I have great internet access and my laptop can run GeForce Now. Well, okay, fair enough. You match all of those. Great. But that doesn't mean that everything is still perfect. For instance, GeForce Now is targeted at laptop gamers, those who have very basic Windows laptops or MacBooks. Why do you have a MacBook if you're trying to game? But anyway. That's who GeForce Now is targeted at. And as a result, that means that you'll be able to take your gameplay experience wherever you go, right? Well, let's say you decide to go on vacation and you're in your hotel room. What if your hotel doesn't have as good as an internet connection as you do back at home? That would be an issue. Another thing to take into consideration is that because GeForce Now is totally reliant on the internet, if there's ever a time where you don't have an internet connection at all, that means you cannot play. On top of that, every single game that's in the GeForce Now library is basically now an online-only game, even if that game doesn't actually require you to have an internet in its native form. But because it's running through GeForce Now, that means unless you have an internet connection, you won't be able to play. And there's also the fact that not every game is supported by GeForce Now. So if there's a particular game that you want to play, but your laptop can't run it, and it's not available in GeForce Now, then you won't be able to do anything about it aside from, well, buying the hardware. And really, that's ultimately what your best bet still is. While GeForce Now is an amazing service, it's not going to be the total replacement to buying actual game-ready hardware. Nothing is going to be able to beat that in our current technological environment. I spent about nearly $1,000 on my gaming laptop because I moved down here to Ecuador and I needed something with the right amount of power. Before that, I was using an old Dell Inspiron laptop from about 2012, which had Intel HD graphics, 8 gigs of RAM, and an Intel Core i3 processor. So I know how it feels to have hardware that just simply is not built for playing games. But I bought my laptop simply because I knew I needed the hardware with me. Streaming services are great, but it's not going to ever be able to replace having that actual hardware. So if you were thinking, GeForce Now is amazing, I don't have to spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars on a gaming PC, and all my problems are solved. Yeah, well, as you can tell by this video, it isn't as easy as that. But who knows, perhaps one day when the global internet infrastructure does improve, things will actually be able to get to that point where we can have a streaming service and it will be able to replace having actual hardware. In fact, Brett actually mentioned a really good idea of having something like GeForce Now built into TVs and where all you need is a controller to be able to play. That would be pretty amazing. But again, we still need to fix that internet issue beforehand. Now, I'll have to admit I actually haven't tried out GeForce Now for myself, although I did attempt to do so, but apparently it's just not available for me in this region. According to Nvidia, there are already too many people playing. Hopefully that won't be an issue when this service goes fully fledged, since right now it is in beta, but we'll just have to wait and see exactly how that turns out. So, what do you think of this rebuttal piece? Do you still think GeForce Now is actually a really great service? Or do you agree with me and see the obvious caveats to it? Sound off below and let us know. Until next time, thanks for watching.